بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, in the previous week we were able to go through the introduction in regards to the dressing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we talked about very basic principles that Islam orders us and recommends us when we are choosing our attire. And we talked about what are the different rulings of libas when it comes to Sharia. Inshallah, while keeping those notes in mind, we will try to go through the narrations that Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah has compiled in this chapter. وبالسند المتصل منا إلى الإمام الترمذي رحمه الله تعالى قال حدثنا محمد بن حميد الرازي قال حدثنا الفضل بن موسى وأبو تميلة وزيد بن حباب عن عبد المؤمن بن خالد عن عبد الله بن بريدة عن أم سلمة رضي الله عنها قالت كان أحب الثياب إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم القميص. This was the first narration. The next narration is also from Salama radiallahu ta'ala anha, in which she mentions كان أحب الثياب إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم القميص. And the third narration is almost the same, where she mentions كان أحب الثياب إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يلبسه القميص. Salama radiallahu ta'ala anha narrates that the most beloved of all clothing that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would wear was the shirt. Three different narrations. Imam Tirmidhi has brought three narrations very similar. They all from Salama radiallahu ta'ala anha, in which she mentions that the most beloved dress code that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would prefer to wear, talking about the upper garment, is al-qamis. It's a shirt. If you look at the word qamis, it just means anything that you can cover with, but in reality, the difference between anything else and qamis is that it's actually sewn to the shape of the body. Obviously, it doesn't explicitly tell us how it was. Well, inshallah, in the next narration is going to give you a little bit of description, but al-qamis is basically anything that is sewn to the body parts, the way it's outlined. Salama radiallahu ta'ala anha, obviously, she was the wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. She married Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam after Abu Salama. Abu Salama radiallahu anh, when they had a child, Salama bin Abi Salama, the father was named Abu Salama and the mother was named Salama. And that's what they were known from. And these are the names that went on, and everybody knew them with those names. And Abu Salama and Salama radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, they actually migrated to Habasha as well. And after migrating to Habasha, they came back to Makkah al-Mukarramah, and after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam migrated to Madinatul Munawwara, they also migrated to Madinatul Munawwara. Some of the historians actually quoted her, gave her the title, the first woman to migrate from Makkah to Medina. Actually, one of the first women to migrate in general after the arrival of Islam. Why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prefer a qamis over a sheet? Why was it that a qamis was the most preferable attire to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The reason is it was comfortable. If we look at it, when we go for Hajj or Umrah, when we have a cloth around us, we always feel this uncomfort. We feel the discomfort that maybe some body part is showing, even though it might not be satar, but just because it's when something is sewn and there's no chances of it being exposed, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam preferred that. So again, we talked about very briefly last week that the purpose of clothing is not just to cover, but also to cover in a fashion that is most preferable in the eyes of Sharia. And this is one of those examples why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would love the qameez. Once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told the Sahaba, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's normal routine after Fajr Salah, after leading Salat al-Fajr, he would turn around. He would turn around and face the Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in, and he would sit there all the way until Ishraq. What would he do? First, he would ask any of the Sahaba that, did anyone see a dream? Did anybody see a dream that requires interpretation? If nothing, then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would sit there, and the Sahaba, as they would need to go, they would leave. But a lot of the Sahaba would actually sit there till shuruq, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would engage himself in dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa taala all the way till Ishraq. And after Ishraq, he would perform the Ishraq salah, and then he would move on to do his daily task. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever the Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in saw a dream, he would interpret the dream for them. But if there is, when there were times when the Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in did not have any dream, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would sometimes tell his dream. So once Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, I saw my ummah, and different people have different types of qameez on them, different types of shirt. Some of them were more covering than the other. Some of them were more covering than the other. And I saw the qameez of Umar radiallahu an, that it was dragging. He was dragging it. So, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stayed quiet. Obviously this was a quiz for the Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in to try to understand what this dream meant. So the Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in, they anxiously asked Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, what did you interpret this dream? What was this shirt? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, this shirt is the deen and the knowledge of this deen. That Umar radiallahu an had that level that some of us might have a little bit or more, but Umar radiallahu an reached the highest level. And there are different dreams in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam interpreted different things for different different objects. So once it was about milk. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving milk. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also interpreted that as deen and the knowledge of deen. So these are different examples. Again, this is an actual art on its own, that it's not everybody's cup of tea to start interpreting dreams, but it's obviously it's a specific art that needs to be acquired from the knowledgeable individuals for us to begin interpreting the deen. Also, when in the Battle of Badr, there were different captives that were captured from the kuffar of Quraysh. And one of them at that time was Abbas radiallahu anhu. He had not become Muslim, and he was captured amongst those prisoners. And Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, who was the head and the leader of all the hypocrites and the munafiqeen, he gave his shirt. Abbas radiallahu anh, when he came, he did not have a shirt. So Abdullah ibn Ubay actually gave his shirt to Abbas radiallahu anh. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam remembered that Abdullah ibn Ubay gave this garment to Abbas radiallahu anh. It was a qameez. At the time of the death of Abdullah ibn Ubay, this is the compassion that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had for for anyone, whether they were Muslims or not. Abdullah ibn Ubay was the leader of the munafiqeen. The difference between a kafir and a munafiq, there is a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the munafiqun, the hypocrites, are not he didn't only mention that they would be in the hellfire. No, they would be in the lowest pit of hellfire. And the reason is because hypocrisy is such a crime. Hypocrisy is such a crime that it actually gives you an impression. When we know our enemies that this is our enemy. The thing with hypocrisy is that the enemy is within. So it's an enemy which is showing himself as a friend. These are the individuals. And the beauty of all of this is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knows every single one of them by their first name. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knows all the munafiqun to the extent that he listed all of them to Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, who was considered the secret keeper of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam counted all the munafiqun who existed in Medina. But yet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so loving and so passionate toward these individuals that never ever could the Sahaba tell that this person is a munafiq. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam treated them any differently than the true companions, then it would be very easy to filter out who is a munafiq and who is not. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ethics, his manners, his morals were so high that he did not differentiate. And this is why Umar radiallahu an would continuously ask Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, am I amongst the munafiqun? He would because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's behavior could not be distinguished between a believer, a non-believer, a believer, and a munafiq. There is no difference. So even in the khulafa, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, Umar radiallahu anh, they would wait. When a funeral would come, the order is, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِ. Any of the munafiqun die, you're not allowed to pray on them. The funeral could not be led. So Umar radiallahu anh, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, the khulafa would actually wait to see if Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman radiallahu anh would appear for the funeral or not. If he would appear, they would lead the funeral prayer. If he wouldn't come, if he wouldn't arrive at the funeral, then they would not lead the prayer. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though now we know the crime of nifaq in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but yet this is a leader of all the munafiqun. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he heard the news, he said, when the funeral is ready, call me so I may pray on him. And due to my prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might forgive him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had previously revealed the ayahs, استغفر لهم أو لا تستغفر لهم. Whether you pray for them, you seek forgiveness for them, or you don't. إن تستغفر لهم 70 مرة. Even if you were to seek forgiveness 70 times, فلن يغفر الله لهم. Allah definitely will not forgive them. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was approached by the son of Abdullah ibn Ubay. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I need your qameez so I may put it in my father's grave. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that he can pay back what Abdullah ibn Ubay had done in Battle of Badr, which was so many years before. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam remembered not only that he gave a qameez to Rasulullah, but he gave a qameez to the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam declared a rule, al-ammu kal-ab. That the uncle is just like the father. In the absence of a father, the uncle is just like the father. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would always treat his uncles like his father, because he never had a father. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him the qameez. And not only that he gave him the qameez, when the funeral was ready, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam arrived there to lead the salah prayer, the salatul janaza. Umar radiallahu an, he knows how harsh this was, but he grabbed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to remind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told you not to ask forgiveness and not to pray on them. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave an example which only a Nabi can give in regards to his ummah. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me an option. Either I seek forgiveness or I don't seek forgiveness. If I seek forgiveness even 70 times, He will not forgive. But what if it's 71 times? What if it's 75 times? What if it's 100 times? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his love and his compassion for the ummah. We went over different narrations in multiple times. This is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's compassion and his love, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went and led the salah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to explicitly stop Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that revelation came in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to specifically mention, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتٍ, that do not pray on these individuals. So this is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did not own more than one qamis at one time. Many times he had different sheets, but as far as the qamis is concerned, a lot of the commentators, they mention that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had only one garment at one time. Moving on to the next narration, in which we go into a little bit of detail about the characteristic of this specific garment, which was the shirt. وبه قال حدثنا عبد الله بن محمد بن حجاج قال حدثنا معاذ بن هشام قال حدثني أبي عن بديل يعني ابن ميسرة العقيلي عن شهر بن حوشب عن أسماء بنت يزيد رضي الله عنها قالت كان كم قميص رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى الرزق. Asma bint Yazid radiallahu anha narrates that the sleeve of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam's shirt would reach the wrist. Would reach the wrist. And we see that nowadays, many of the Islamic attire would reach the wrist. And these are the narrations in which is followed in regards to the sleeve of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that it would reach the sleeve. In different narrations, it comes that it would reach past his wrist, and some say it would reach his fingertips. Again, very easily it can be interpreted that these are on different times in different qamis. Some of them were slightly larger, and some of them were slightly shorter. And inshallah it will come in another narration that his sleeve was so tight that he could not roll up his sleeve. And to perform wudu, he would actually have to take his hand out from underneath to do wudu. That's also coming later. But in regards to the length of the sleeve, is the most preferable is to have it right up to the wrist. To the extent that some of the commentators, they mention that specifically in salah, if the sleeve is going beyond the wrist, then we should have it folded up to the wrist. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he wore both types. Some of them were larger, some of them were smaller, and some of them were very tight. And some of them were loose. Therefore, he would be able to roll it up when he is performing wudu. Mona Khalil Ahmad Salanpuri, he combines and puts all the narrations to reconcile between every single one of them. And he mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam preferred to wear the garment of the sleeve that would reach his wrist. But he had sometimes wore it even further, just so that the ummah would know that it is allowed. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam many times would do certain things just to show the ummah that it is allowed. Therefore, it won't be impermissible, but rather it would be a matter of permissibility, a matter of what's preferable and what's not preferable, and it won't be a debate between permissibility and impermissibility. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have his sleeve up to his wrist. And that is the reason why, if we were to look at the etiquettes of salah, even though the satar is very minute in comparison to how much we cover, it's very minimum. But even then, the commentators and the fuqaha, the jurists, they very clearly outline that the sleeve should meet all the way until the wrist. Anything lower than that, if it's anything higher than that, if it's coming to the middle of the forearm or somewhere around there, that is still okay. But if the elbow is exposed, they consider unpreferable and undesirable, because obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would all the time would have his arms covered when performing salah or otherwise. In regards to the length of the qamis, obviously different length has been given, but the most preferable narration is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's izar as well as his qamis would actually come in the middle of his shin. We know that that is the line, because if you look at two extremes, if anything is dragging below the ankle, if the ankle is covered, we talked about it, that it is makruh tahrimi, and some even go to the extreme and say it is haram. At least is undesirable. It is something that should not be done, and the ankles should not be covered. And if it goes too high, then we'll start compromising the satar, because the knee is also part of the satar. So So to make sure that we avoid both extremes, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would always keep his qamis as well as his izar in the middle of the two, which would be half of his shin. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's qamis would be loose enough that it's comfortable on him. So it wouldn't be so tight that it would be difficult to move around, and at the same time, it won't be so loose that there would be chances of compromising satar. It won't be any of those, but rather it would be it would be just loose enough that it's comfortable and tight enough that it won't give up the shape of the shirt. Some of the commentators actually mention that the beauty of wearing a qamis that lengthy is that the actual awra of a man, the actual satar, which is between the navel and the knee, that area is covered with two different cloths. If we were to wear an izar and wear a qamis on top of it, then that area would be covered with two sheets and two different cloths rather than one. If we were to wear only the izar up to the waist, and then the shirt only comes up to the waist, then obviously there's more chances of the satar being exposed. And this is one of the wisdoms that have been given. وبه قال حدثنا أبو عمار الحسين بن حريث قال حدثنا أبو نعيم قال حدثنا زهير عن عروة بن عبد الله بن قشير عن معاوية بن قرة عن أبيه قال أتيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في رهط من مزينة لنبايعه وإن قميصه لمطلق أو قال زر قميصه مطلق قال فأدخلت يدي في جيب قميصه فمسست الخاتم. Qurra ibn Ilyas radiyallahu anhu narrates, I came with a group from the tribe of Muzayna to perform bay'ah. Bay'ah, pledge of allegiance, that's the best way to translate it, with the blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he goes on to mention, which is the reason why Imam Tirmidhi has brought this narration into this chapter, is the shirt of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was open. Or he said the button was open. Either the shirt itself was open, or there was a button and the button was not closed, therefore the button was open. I inserted my hand in the opening of the shirt of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and touched the seal of the prophethood. Few things to keep in mind here. First and foremost, we went into a little bit of detail about manners and etiquettes of traveling. And this is a very good example that not only that we would rather travel with a group of individuals, but also with a group of individuals that we have acquaintance with, that we get along with. Because a lot of times, if we were to try to gather a group and we do not get along, it makes it even more difficult to travel. Or if we were to travel with a group of strangers that we're not acquainted with, it makes it difficult. So we can see that Sahaba Ridwanullahi Ta'ala Alayhim Ajma'in, whenever they would come, they would always come with a group. And majority of the times, it would be a group of their own clan. It would be a group that were amongst the people who lived together. So they had the same habits, they had the same living standards and the same living styles, so on and so forth. So that way, in traveling, it makes things very, very easy. And they get along, and we can help one another while traveling because everyone's coming with the same mindset. The second thing he mentions is that we came linubayi'ahu, that we came to pledge allegiance. What is bay'ah and what is the status of bay'ah in Islam? It's very important to know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed different types of bay'ah throughout his life with different individuals. First and foremost was bay'ah al-Islam. It was on Islam. So any person that would come to accept accept Islam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would perform bay'ah, so that way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam could accept him into the folds of Islam. Obviously, inshallah, we'll go into a little bit of detail as to what is the purpose of bay'ah. So this was one type. Another type was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would take bay'ah on different battles. That whenever, before any battle, the Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'een would gather and take bay'ah on the hands of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So therefore, they can be united and they can fight on the cause of Islam and for a better outcome. And some of them, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam also did it on hijrah. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam took bay'ah on hijrah. And also, there's a different type of bay'ah that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as well as the khulafa after them, which was on rulership, on khilafah. And we will know that Rasulullah, the companions after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whoever were assigned the reign of leadership of the Islamic State, they always took bay'ah, so therefore everybody accepted them as a leader and they had officially taken the responsibility of ruling the Islamic world. And we also find in narrations that when Mahdi radiallahu anh would come back, he would also take bay'ah. To the extent that it's even mentioned in Sihah, in authentic narrations, that he would take bay'ah between the Rukn and Rukn Yamani and Maqam Ibrahim. That it's that specific area where he would be recognized as Mahdi and he would actually begin to accept bay'ah in that form. And that again would be bay'ah ala khilafah. That he has accepted to be the ruler and everyone has accepted him as a ruler. So that is the exchange of allegiance that takes place. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout his life on different occasions is also known that he took bay'ah on specific matters. It's more like a promising allegiance. It's just a promise. And just the way it comes in the Quran that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took bay'ah with the women of Ansar, that they will not yubayya'naka ala alla yushrikna billahi shay'a. They will not assign partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was again something that they were promising. They were already Muslims. There was something that they were promising. وَلَا يُشْرِكْنَ بِاللَّهِ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَسْرِقْنَا. They will not steal. وَلَا يَزْنِينَ. They will not fornicate. وَلَا بِبُهْتَانٍ يَفْتَرُونَ بَيْنَ أَيْدِينَ وَأَرْجُلِنَا. They will not slander one another. All these things were a promise that they made to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these were the promises that they kept throughout their life. To the extent that once the Muhajirin were taken bay'ah, that they will not ask anyone for anything. Different Muhajirin, because obviously when they migrated from Makkah al-Mukarramah to Madinatul Munawwara, they were in a very, very state of poverty. They were very poor and they were suffering all types of financial difficulty. And they were in very desperate needs. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's only one rule was, be patient. The hereafter is for you. The dunya is not for us. The hereafter. And this is a lifelong lesson for us that we have to live in this world. Dunya sijnul mu'min. It's as if we're a captive in this world. This is again, we find difficulty in every corner of our life. We find difficulty just because we are Muslims. And this is something that history has repeated over and over and over. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took this bay'ah that they will not ask. Obviously, if somebody recognizes our situation and they give something and they financially support us, it's a different scenario. But they will not explicitly ask anyone for anything. And the Muhajirin lived up to this allegiance and this pledge to such a degree that even when they were mounted on a horse or a camel or any ride, if their whip or something from their animal would fall down, this is something Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a different agenda when he took this pledge. But even when that whip or that stick would fall down, they will not ask anyone. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted them to not show their financial status to anyone. This was the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took this pledge. But the Muhajirin lived this pledge up to such a standard that even something of their own would fall, they will not ask anyone to do their work even. So they would actually unmount themselves and reach down and grab that stick or something very minute, and they would mount back on, but they will not ask anyone to hand this to them. And this was obviously the beauty of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the different bay'ah that is even practical now, that a lot of different scholars that take bay'ah all over the world, is bay'ah, it's a promising bay'ah of amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, or just to amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar to ourselves. A promise that we would refrain from evil and vice and we will do good. This is the bay'ah that the scholars take nowadays, and we'll see it in all parts of the world, and there are scholars that actually take this pledge. Now, if we were to look at the purpose of this pledge, it's just a promise. Do we feel that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not trust his companions? Not even iota of doubt. But the truth is, when a person puts his hand between the hands of another individual with such high caliber that he is so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and promises something, it makes it twice as difficult to break that promise than a person just to make a promise without that, or just to make a firm intention. So just to take it to another level. And this is why the Muhajirin, the Ansar, on different occasions, it comes that Jarir radiallahu anhu says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam took a pledge from me that I will do khair to every believing man and woman. Every believing man and woman. That every single person that I will see, I will be good to them and I will care for them. So this is something very minute. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam wanted to show the importance. And this is exactly what is practical nowadays, that a scholar or someone who is of that caliber would actually make us promise that we will not do something, or we will promise to do something. And if you look at the words that is used in these bay'ah, it's very simple. That we will refrain from these sins. And it's very similar to the Quran ayah about وَلَا يَسْرِقْنَا وَلَا يَزْنِينَ وَلَا يَقْتُلْنَا أَوْلَادَهُنَّ وَلَا بِبُهْتَانٍ يَفْتَرِينَهُ بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِنَّ وَأَرْجُلِهِنَّ, that we will not fornicate, we will not steal, we will not slander one another, we will not take advantage of one another, we will make sure that we will pray all of our salah, we would pay our zakah, so on and so forth. So these words of this pledge is just a promise between us and a very pious person who has respect in our eyes, that if we were to ever even think about doing something wrong, this promise would actually make our intention even firm and keep us away from that. And that is the status, and this is why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took this bay'ah from different individuals, different companions throughout, to the extent that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took bay'ah, sometimes it was even those individuals who participated in Battle of Badr, who were considered the most elite amongst all the companions, to the extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had guaranteed them that do whatever you want, you have been forgiven. Do whatever you want. These are people with that caliber, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is also taking pledge with them. So this is just to give us an understanding that every single step in our life, we need to understand that if we don't have someone that we can counsel with, we can talk to, we're always going to make the wrong decision. We talked in our last week's session in regards to if we're wearing a specific garment with the intention of being satisfied that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this ability and this privilege to wear this, or am I doing it to manage a stage of superiority over others? It's very difficult. Sometimes they're so mixed within each other that we cannot differentiate. And this is when we need an advisor. We need someone who can tell us, no, you're not doing it for this reason, you're doing it for that reason. And if we were to start pondering over our life, we will see that we run into these decisions almost in every step of our life. Every single time. It's too cold outside to go for Salat al-Fajr. Are you saying this because it is really true? Or are we saying this because shaitan is just telling us, and because we have taken matters into our own hand, we are doing this on our own? We need an advisor that can tell us that no, it's not too cold outside. If somebody was to tell you that, hey, you forgot your cell phone over there, would we get up? Yes, we would. In reality, this is a fact. When we have to get up for work, it's not too late, even if it's 6 in. But for Salat al-Fajr, shaitan will play a game with us. And this is something that we deal with on day-to-day life. Inshallah, moving on to the next narration. Before we can actually move on to that, there was one thing that the shirt of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had both types of shirt. Some of them where the collar was actually really big. It was really big that it did not have any button, and it was very easy to take off and put back on. And some of the companions would actually not have any buttons just to follow what they saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's garment. So some of the companions would actually do that. But we know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did have some garments with buttons on them. And this is why the narration says either his shirt was open or the button of his shirt was open. That's just to clarify that we see some of the garments, it does not have any closing. It's just open. And some of them, it does have buttons, but you can choose to leave them open. So both ways, that some of them did not have buttons and some of them were just left open. And jayb actually just means any opening. So we know that jayb in Arabic as well as Urdu and Farsi and other languages, jayb means a pocket. And this was because some of the older clothing, they had jayb in their sleeve, that they would actually leave things inside. So jayb just means any opening. And nowadays it's an opening where we would keep our belongings. So that's the meaning of jayb. And if you look at the narration here, the word jayb is used, that is an opening, and that opening could be anywhere. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's shirt was left open, and the Sahabi, he inserted his hand just to touch the seal of the prophethood. And this is a combination of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's love and the easygoing personality of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the love and the compassion that the Sahaba ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in had for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam carried such awe inside of him, he had this awe built in him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave, that sometimes he would look at an individual and that person would be frightened. He would get scared when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would appear, because of his personality. But at the same time, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not have any reservation. And on the other hand, the companions, when they saw something, they surpassed their limits, because they know that this privilege will not come again. That I would be so close to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be so eager to see me accept Islam, that I will not be able to touch Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and specifically an area which was not always exposed. So he took the opportunity, and again, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not stop him, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew what is coming next, and which is the Islam of all these individuals who came. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not stop him, and at the same time, the Sahabi knew that if I leave this opportunity, I'm not sure if I would ever be able to get this opportunity again. So this was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's personality and the love of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Moving on to the next narration. وبه قال حدثنا عبد بن حميد قال حدثنا محمد بن فضل قال حدثنا حماد بن سلمة عن حبيب بن شهيد عن حسن عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم خرج وهو يتكي على أسامة بن زيد عليه ثوب قطري قد توشح به فصلى بهم. Anas radiallahu anh mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam left his house with the help and the assistance of Usama ibn Zayd. And this was the time when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was in his last days. And that's why he could not walk on his own. And this is the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam needed assistance. So Usama bin Zayd radiallahu anhu, in other narrations it comes that there were two people who carried Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam to the masjid, and he led the companions in prayer. And at that time there was a thawbun qatriyun. Qitri is actually a Yemeni printed garment. Qitri is a town in Yemen, and this was printed in Yemen, and we talked about this in the first narrations also, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wear this. There was actually lines of red or green or different garments, and it wasn't a garment that was completely red or green, but rather there were only lines. And tawashshaha could mean two things: that either he was wrapped in it completely, that no body part was exposed, because obviously he wasn't feeling very well, and he needed to be covered very good because he was feeling cold. He was sick at that time, so he was wrapped. Or it could just mean that this sheet was over his shoulder. It can mean both things: that either he was wrapped completely or it was just put over his shoulder. It was basically a comfortable way of walking. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, while getting help from companions to walk, he did not also want to worry about his garment. Therefore, either he wrapped it around himself very good, or he just put it around his shoulder so it doesn't come in the way while he's walking. In addition to this narration, there is a little story about Yahya ibn Mu'in. I'm not going to read the Arabic, but in here it mentions that Ibn Fadl narrates that Yahya ibn Mu'in asked me when we met in regards to this narration. And this was a common communication and a common conversation between muhaddithun. Whenever they met one another, they only talked about narrations. That, oh, you have this narration, maybe you have a shorter link, so therefore give me this narration and I'll give you this narration. And, nowadays we have different type of exchanges. So at that time when the muhaddithun were together, they would always exchange narration. So Muhammad ibn Fadl, rahimahullah, he mentions that when Yahya ibn Mu'in came to me, he asked me about this narration. I said, sure, no problem. And he had started narrating to him. So Yahya ibn Mu'in says that it would be better if you could dictate it to me from your book. Therefore, it's more authentic, it's proper, there's no chances of any errors in the narration. So he said, okay, let me go grab the book. And he tried to leave, and Yahya ibn Mu'in, he grabbed him from his garment. And he dragged him closer, and he said, no. Say it to me first, and then go get your book. And then he mentioned the reason why he did this. He said that, I fear that I will not meet you upon your return. Maybe I might not live to see you, and I would be deprived of this narration, or maybe an incident would occur and you will not come back to me, or something else would happen and we might not be able to exchange this narration. Therefore, give it to me first, and then you can go get your book and then dictate it to me. And Yahya ibn Mu'in, he had such a high caliber. He was actually the teacher of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala. He was one of the greatest muhaddithun of that time, that he was known that he was Imam fi jarh wa ta'dil. Jarh wa ta'dil is a terminology which is commonly used between muhaddithun, that if a narration comes from a person, is that narration accepted or not is based on the individual who are transmitting it, all the narrators. And he was one of those individuals who would say that this person is acceptable or non-acceptable. And therefore, it would decide that whether we're going to take this narration or not. He was considered the Imam of Jarh wa Ta'dil. And basically any approving and rejecting of narration came from him. Imam Ahmad used to say about him all the time that if Yahya ibn Mu'in didn't hear a narration, it doesn't exist. If he didn't hear it, if you were to hear a narration and you want to see how authentic it is, and you want to see if it does exist or not, just mention it to Yahya ibn Mu'in, and if he says, I haven't heard of it, that means it doesn't exist. It's just a polite way of him saying that it does not exist. So he said, I haven't heard of it. Because many times, just out of respect, the muhaddithun will never say that this is not a narration. And this is one of the etiquettes that should be adopted all the time, that in regards to any ruling or any etiquette or anything of Sharia, we should not say such thing doesn't exist. Rather, the etiquette of this is that we should say, it's not in my knowledge, or I haven't heard of it. And this is what Imam Ahmad used to always say, that if Yahya ibn Mu'in, rahimahullah, says that I haven't heard of it, that means that it does not exist. It's just a polite way of him saying that it does not exist. Inshallah, we will stop here and continue. This is a pretty lengthy chapter. Imam Tirmidhi has narrated almost 16 or 17 different narrations in here. Inshallah, we'll continue the rest of the narrations next week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to adopt all the different sunnah and all the different etiquettes and manners that we learn from these sessions. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to take the most advantage of these sessions. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make these sessions a means of gaining closeness to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and ultimately gaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
مولاي صل وسلم